Hello and welcome to The Next Great Car Era, a podcast by EVTUNERS. I'm your host, Daniel Martin, and today I'm sitting down with Kyle Meziere, who converted a 1953 classic Jeep Willys with a Tesla motor and Chevy Volt batteries. This isn't just a show car, and Kyle has been actively taking this build off-road into the desert, doing what Jeeps do best. So we talk about that and a ton more. Enjoy. And we're live. Awesome, Kyle. We made it. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on, Dan. I always enjoy talking to you.
I've been really excited to sit down again ever since I met you at SEMA, where you were with your Jeep.
Yeah, had a blast there. That was awesome to run into you there. I'm glad I kind of got a chance to talk to you there, and yeah, that was a cool experience there. That was the first time I've ever had a car there, and I think that was something that was kind of a checklist or a bucket list item. I think to take a car to SEMA, and I think that was something cool and something I think that a lot of people kind of aspire to do. So that was a cool opportunity.
Yeah, it definitely is. So you had been before, though. Is that right? For me, it was my first SEMA, but you were a veteran.
Oh wow. Yeah. So my family owns a company called Meziere Enterprises. My dad and his two brothers own a company out of Escondido, California, called Meziere Enterprises, and they've been around since like the 80s. And they do a lot of different things, but one of their main product lines is like drag race parts. So they've been going to SEMA show for probably 20 plus years, or since I was a kid. They've had a booth there. So I've only been, I think, twice before. One time I kind of hung out in the booth and tried to help out a little bit, and another time I got a chance to wander around. That was actually the 2022 show that I got a chance to walk around. Okay,
cool. So it was, at least you kind of knew the venue a little bit and knew what to expect, but this was the first time you had the car, and that was the Jeep build.
Yeah, so the first time I had the car, and I think, it was kind of cool having gone the year before too. I think compared to the year before, the electrify section, or the electric car and electric propulsion and future technology area, I think is what it was called this year.
Yeah,
was in my mind like really, really cool this year, and it was really a step in a great direction. I think it was a little bit off the beaten path the year before in 2022. This year was like front and center. Every time you tried to, because I was kind of towards one end of it, the Jeep was, so every time I tried to walk back to the Jeep, like you had to like walk around, people needed to wait. Like there was just crowds. I don't know if you kind of experienced the same thing, but it just a great location, I thought.
Yeah, it was. I didn't have any point of reference, but it was right in the thick of things, and you definitely had people that were coming through that were not specifically looking for EVs. They were just, doing their rounds, trying to cover everything. And then they got the pleasant surprise of, hey, there's these cool cars that are breaking records and are super fun, and that's what brings us here today. So tell us a little bit more about your Jeep. And for those who maybe haven't seen it, we did do a video at SEMA, but for those who haven't seen that video on EVTUNERS already, what's the cliff notes of this build?
So it's a 1953 Jeep Willys. It was originally an Army Jeep, I believe. So it's the M38A1, which is like the military version of the CJ5. And okay. So my grandpa had it. He didn't have it, like, I think he got it in the early 2000s, and he gave it to me, I think, in the early 2010s. And it was pretty rough. It had been sitting in a yard. I think it ran when he parked it, but it was pretty rough. It had been sitting outside, and it was, it's 70 years old. So it's an old Jeep. And long story short, I put a Tesla Model 3 motor in it. I put a Chevy Volt battery pack in it. Did basically a full restoration. Everything got torn apart, and it was, sandblasted and repainted, and just about everything on the Jeep was changed. That even the bodywork was. I had to stretch the wheel wells were stretched a bit, so Even the sheet metal had to be moved around quite a bit. And the frame was, obviously modified to put newer suspension in, and tried to really kind of add the best of both worlds. And I tried to really add, be conscious of the historic kind of Jeep elements. Like one thing I really wanted to put in the Jeep was Dana 44s, like the classic solid axle Jeep kind of equipment. And I think solid axles are something that make a Jeep, and it's kind of an iconic piece of the Jeep. So I put Dana 44s out of a 1975 Wagoneer, and I think that having kind of the historic kind of Dana axle under the Jeep still, it kind of complements nicely the newer technology, like the motor and battery.
You also, what I noticed when I was walking around, I was like, this looks like a normal EV swap. Like everything it's resto mod. And then I got to the steering wheel and it was like, wait a minute, there's a yoke steering wheel on this Jeep.
So that was cool. That was something that we did like specifically for SEMA. We were we finished up the Jeep in like April of 2023, and we finished it up just in time to go to Easter Jeep Weekend. Like literally, like probably, we had it done, test drove it up and down the street and loaded it in the trailer and took off to Utah. And it had like just a regular steering wheel. But before SEMA, SEMA's like, it's just loud, all the cars there are loud, everything's a little bit over the top. So we felt we had to do something a little over the top. So my brother hunted down it was a yoke off a Plaid Model S, I think. And so he bought it off eBay. It was off a wrecked one. So I think it was like $90 or something like that. And we were able to machine it down and figure out how to bolt it onto a Chevy column. And I got a buddy that works at an aerospace company. And so he put, the middle piece was kind of missing because it's where the airbag had been before, it was in a crash. And so he made this like real carbon fiber, like aerospace, grade carbon fiber, like center cap for it. And I thought it was appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah. But so this is more than just a show car though. You're taking it off road and doing what Jeeps do best, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We, I grew up around race cars, and so, it's always kind of our beliefs that the Jeeps or any kind of car that you make should be able to have a little fun with it too, regardless of what it's intended to do, whether it's a street car or not. So yeah, we've had it, and we took it to Moab almost, literally as soon as it was done, we took it to Moab and did a little bit of off-roading there. And then this footage is from about a week and a half ago. We took it out to Anza Borrego, which is about an hour and a half east of San Diego. We have some beautiful desert out there, and it was just a beautiful day. We did 27 miles on the trail that day, and the Jeep did great. We were really stoked. One big question mark for the day was whether we would make it 27 miles off road, because off-road range is a little bit different, or at least we were guessing it would be a little different, because it's softer sand, as you can see here, that it's kind of sand washes that we were spending most of the day in. The air pressure we put down real low to kind of smoothen out the ride. So I think we're running about 17 psi of tire pressure most of the day in the Kumo tires. And but yeah, we did 27 miles, and it's only an 18.8 kWh battery. It's a battery out of a 2017 Chevy Volt. So I think that's, talking to other people that have off-roaded with electric cars, I think one data point that I think is really good is talking to some people that run like Rivian off-road and stuff. And I think this kind of weekend day trip type of off-roading, where you're going maybe 10 miles an hour on average, and you're with a group of friends, like I think you're going to see that you get really good mileage relative to what you would expect with a gas car. And I think it's going to be a really, really good use case for electric cars.
Do you have what are you using to control it? Are you able to see what your what your like your watt hour per mile is at all when you're off road?
Yeah, so I have like a little display. So I can see, I can't really see like, so I have the Orion BMS is running the battery.
Okay.
And once I get that dialed in, there's so many different aspects of this build that's been together since April, but there's still so many things I can fine tune. And one of them is the kind of getting the BMS still kind of completely dialed in so it knows where the battery is. But I can see the pack voltage. That's what I've mostly been going off, is just pack voltage. And just from experience, you know, I've driven the car to work maybe about 7 times. I live about 10
Okay.
miles from where I work. I've driven it to work, and so about 10 miles there, and then I can charge it up at work. At work, we get free charging, so I'll charge it up,
Nice.
and then I can stop even at like a charge point. It works like on a J1772 at a charge point, and I can charge there. And just based on you know, driving around town and a little bit of off-roading I've done, I kind of got a feel for how many volts it would drop. It usually I've been charging it to about high 385, maybe 390 volts before we went out to the desert. It's a 360 nominal pack voltage, but you know, I'll bring it down to about 320 volts. And just based on that is kind of where I've kind of been gauging the state of charge so far. I think the Orion has some features to kind of do it in a more scientific way, but so far I've just been using the pack voltage to kind of gauge where I'm at.
Yeah, it's interesting. Before I started talking to builders, I didn't quite understand that how that voltage drop worked, and it was kind of like a fuel gauge, where it's like full. The pack is outputting, you know, a certain amount of voltage. What did you say, 393 or something like that? That's like considered full. But then
Yeah,
as the pack gets emptier, the voltage that it's outputting it drops down, and you don't want to go too low. It's a whole nother way of looking at like battery capacity that for a layman like me, I wasn't aware of until I started talking and learning about this stuff.
yeah, and it's not linear either too. So I got in trouble. I got in trouble one day. I was a buddy came over on a Saturday. We are going to take. I live in Irvine, California, and I live about 10 miles um, from Balboa Island. There's this really cool place out here called Balboa Island. It's a cool place to go grab an ice cream or something like that on a weekend. And so my buddy came over, and we were going to drive down to Balboa Island and drive back. But I hadn't charged the car up yet, and I usually would only run it down to about 360 volts. So we get to the island, and it's about 10 miles away. Drop down to 340 volts, and I was like, "Oh, I'm fine," you know, because you know the battery, you know, based on literature I was reading online and stuff, people were saying like, you know, knowing that how many cells are in a series and stuff, you know, they would say, you know, you can take it down to 310 without damaging the battery easily. And so I get to the island, which is, you know, that's where we're turning around. So it was, you know, our halfway point, and we had used up 20 volts. So I'm thinking like, oh, I'm okay, you know, because, you know, I'll drive back home and I'll have 320 volts, and it's still safe enough, you know.
Good to go.
Um,
Yeah.
that's what I thought, but I had overlooked the fact that especially towards the bottom of the pack, these things aren't linear. And you know,
Hmm.
once you get down to like I think 330s on the volt pack, like the energy goes really fast. So by the time I got
Oh,
back, the pack was down to like 250 volts or something like that. Uh,
dang.
and so luckily I was able to get it on a charger quick enough to where it didn't damage the cells. That was about 7 months ago. But yeah, all of a sudden I looked down at the pack voltage, and you know it's like 250, and I was like shocked. I was like, I didn't, my head was spinning because I didn't realize what had gone on.
So
So
you've kind of done the full spectrum now. You've had like a full, you know, fully charged pack, and you've had it where it's almost given out on you. So now that
oh,
you understand that spread, do you still have range anxiety, or are you like very comfortable with how it works?
so I think like especially on the Jeep, you know, it's very like it's very kind of drive specific, like I really had no idea when we went to Anza-Borrego last weekend. Like, I could barely sleep the night before because, like, I've driven around town and I know, if I have 370 volts on the pack voltage, I can go 10 miles with no worries, and I know that. But I think that I think the whole community, as far as I know, is still learning like how the EVs, especially some of these kind of custom built ones, are going to behave in different environments, and what kind of mileage you're going to get in these different environments, like in soft sand, if you're going 5-10 miles an hour in soft sand. So I think it really depends on environment, and even on pavement. I still haven't fully learned how it does at, say, 55 miles an hour versus if I'm driving around at 30 miles an hour. I think that really its strength is 25 miles an hour around town. I think that's where it's really going to behave pretty well. I have it geared pretty ridiculously like high, so when I'm going like 55 on the freeway or something like that, it's the motor's spinning at 15,000 RPM. So I think combined between the motor spinning so high, which is probably not really in its efficiency range, and then just kind of being an aerodynamic brick going down the highway, the voltage drops pretty quick.
That's the one downside of Jeeps. They're not the slipperiest aerodynamically, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer because it's like, you think about like, oh, for a while, the thought kind of crossed my mind, like, oh, how can I make this more aerodynamic and stuff? But it's like that boxy look is like what makes a Jeep a Jeep. So
yeah.
So,
regardless of drag and charge and all of these things, it seems like, and we've talked a little bit about this before, that for off-roading specifically, EVs is kind of like a unique tool in the toolbox for people who want to get into it, or who are already avid off-roading and outdoor drivers. Can you talk a little bit more about your thought process on how EVs is kind of a unique tool and maybe a really good value proposition for off-roading?
Yeah, so I'm really excited to see where off-roading goes these next couple of years, because I don't know, 2 years ago, maybe even 1 or 2 years ago, the Rivian came out, and that was like really, as far as I know, the only real like off-road EV. And now we're just seeing the Cybertruck come out. So I think that we're going to start seeing more and more data points for off-roading. But I mean, like, I have a Tesla Model 3, and I drove it to Moab, Utah, maybe a few years back, and it was the base Model 3. I think it was like a 200-mile range or something like that. It was like the absolute base model 2019 Model 3. And so driving to Moab, Utah at the time, like the distance between chargers was like even theoretical best, it was like 5% extra like buffer between charges. So I'd be out in the middle of nowhere, and you have the next charge station plugged in, at the other side of the national park or whatever you had to drive through, and it would say like, keep your speed below 70 miles an hour, and like, it'd start to lose more range.
Yeah.
So drop your speed to 55 miles an hour, and you can really see, like, at least, I don't know if you've experienced this, but like if you have the range prediction on, like, you can really see, like, if you drop your speed down like even 10 miles an hour, like the Model 3 gets like so much better range.
Yeah, it's really noticeable, that speed, or like if you are drafting behind a larger truck.
Have you tried that?
Oh yeah, I have. Although it's very uncomfortable because like I have PPF on the car, but even then it's like I don't want to rock to get my windshield, and they're always spitting rocks, man. But like efficiency wise, it's like it makes a huge difference.
Like behind a semi or something?
Yeah. You just get in that slipstream behind them, and all of a sudden your range is crazy extended.
Yeah, I've done that before. I drove back and forth between San Diego and Orange County quite a bit, and at least once it's been to where like I was gonna have very little power left or energy left when I got home. And I pulled behind a semi, and I also slowed down a little bit. And at the same time, it was like all of a sudden you see it went up from like 7% to 14% left when I arrived at my destination. So anyways, I guess the point is there, like, I think, one thing that EVs hate is aerodynamic drag loss, and low speeds, at least on like pavement, I think having regen has really changed the equation for, because you look at how much EVs use around town and stuff, and they're very, very efficient, I think, around town at low speeds. You don't have that aero loss. So I think, like, especially on hard pack and stuff, I had a friend that worked at Rivian that had one of the early Rivian trucks and was talking to me about off-roading in it probably a year and a half ago or something like that. And he was saying when he was off-roading a hard pack with it, it would take about the same kilowatt hour per mile as if you were driving on pavement at 60 miles an hour. About, which in my mind is really good, because I mean, if you're driving a gas car on the trail at 5-10 miles an hour, you're just sitting there burning gas all day, so you're not going to get good range at all. Where I think EVs are probably more tied to mileage, and gas cars are have a significant factor that's tied to kind of hours of motor run time.
Well, it's interesting. I've noticed a similar relationship on track. So I don't know anything about off-roading. I'm learning, but I am also learning about track driving. And last year I took my Model 3 to the track. I think I did 5 or 6 track days. And anyway, people are talking about EV efficiency, battery charge, things like that. But those cars that are going around the track, the Mustangs, the Beamers, it's really easy to forget that while on the highway, they might be getting 20 miles to the gallon. Around the track, they're getting like 4. And they're just burning fuel, and then they got to go and grab race fuel. And so they're not nearly as efficient when they're doing this, like, really this purpose as they are cruising on the highway. So we kind of have a similar relationship here, I think, where gas cars are burning fuel no matter what if you're on the trail, but if you stop on the trail in an EV, your draw goes away, and so it can be kind of more efficient in that way.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, you mentioned that, have you had a chance to compare like a slow speed track driving your car versus a high speed track? Like, it would almost seem to me like maybe you'd be like even more efficient on like a slow speed track where you're using regen a lot.
It gets interesting. So I haven't done that comparison per se, but what I have noticed is 2 things. The one is, as I've gotten faster, the amount of charge that I use, the energy that I use in a given session has gone way up. So when I first started out, I was more cautious. I was learning, and I would be able to go out and say for a 20-minute session, I might use like 25% of my battery charge. And then as I've gotten faster, I'm pushing it harder.
The 80 kWh battery?
82 in the Model 3 Performance. As I've gotten a little bit faster, now I'll go out for that same amount and be using like 40% or 45%.
Whoa.
Big difference, because it's like, going in, coming out of every turn a lot harder, keeping a higher speed. So that I have noticed. I've also noticed that when it comes to regen, it's really good for braking the car. It almost can like act as like really big brakes, because if the regen is high and you're hitting the brakes hard, then you can stop pretty quickly, but you run into issues because pushing power back into the battery pack from regen heats it up. And so when you're on the track, the goal is to keep everything as cool as possible. And so there's a balance to be struck, because regen is nice, but if too much regen and you're actually going to heat up your pack, and then you'll have to take a couple a couple like lazy laps to cool things back off again before you can get on it.
So where have you settled? Like, what kind of track have you driven on so far, and where have you settled as far as like the balance of where you set region?
Yeah, so I've done Big Willow at Willow Springs, and I've done Button Willow, which is kind of like Central Valley north of the Grapevine near Bakersfield. And at this point right now, I'm doing like about 70% regen. I'd like to go lower, but I ran in towards the end of the season. My brakes were not, I need better pads now. And so it was like, well, I'd like to drop the regen, but I can't because I need that to stop. So I'll leave it where it is. But
Is that
maybe this year I'll get some new pads and upgrade the brakes, and then I'll be able to roll it down a little bit more and see where it lands.
that I think you're the first person I've ever talked to that had to put new brakes on a Tesla.
It's just track use when I'm one pedal driving for the daily. And at this point, I have about 23,000 on my Tesla. It's a 2022, and I never use the brakes in daily driving. It's all of that pad wear is from the track, 100%.
Nice. Yeah, I have a newer one now, but I had a 2019 and I put 50,000 miles on it, had it for about a year and a half.
Nice.
And I changed the rear tires right before I sold it, but I never did anything like brakes or anything like that. I never
50
tracked
thou
it.
in a year and a half? That's a lot of driving, dude.
Yeah, I think I had it. Yeah, I think it was only a year and a half. Yeah, I drive a lot. I'm always bouncing between Orange County and San Diego, and um, but yeah, I think it's fascinating. Like there's all these things that like for motorsports and off-roading, like there's all these new things that we have to learn as a community. Like like we've gotten so good at so many things as a racing community. Like knowing spring rates and things like that, and all kinds of motor tuning things, but like we have to learn all kinds of new things, like where do you balance regen and braking, and to me that's what's super exciting about being in cars right now. I've been around cars my whole life, since I think my parents took me to the first drag race when I was probably 4 weeks old or something like that, or I grew up around racing, and I think this is such an exciting time in cars because there is all these new problems to solve, all these new things to learn.
Yeah, I agree with you. And new approaches, like back to the brake pads in our Teslas, we could, if we wanted, put like really aggressive race pads on them and just leave it because daily driving, we're never using the brakes anyway. So squeak away. But and you can't do that with any other car. You would have to like either have be dedicated or deal with the squeaking or swap pads every track day.
Yeah. Yeah, I really, I always, when I drive around my Model 3, I keep the regen all the way up, and I love it. I know sometimes like my wife will jump in the car or someone else will jump in the car and they get instantly annoyed by the high regen, but I grew to love the regen.
I do too. Yeah, I like it. I'm the now when I jump into a gas car, I like get ready to go and turn on the windshield wipers. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not how you go.
Yeah, I miss that, in the gas cars. Like it's almost like it kind of reminds me a little bit of like some of the older cars. Like maybe you're not supposed to do this, but it's kind of fun. Like if you kind of downshift aggressively and kind of use a little bit of the engine braking, like that's kind of what regen reminds me of a little bit.
Yeah, I always came from the camp of that, like downshifting was good. Um, I think there's two camps on that, but I'm with you, and I would do that. I'm curious, kind of a little bit of an aside. Did you, growing up around drag racing, did you yourself do any drag racing?
Very little. I got into all kinds of other things like sports and stuff when I was in high school. So I went to the races a lot with my family, and I grew up, in summers and after school, sometimes working at the family drag racing component business. And it was always going to car shows with my family or trade shows. My dad took me on a lot of work trips as a kid, so it was kind of cool. And
Yeah.
I would get to go to races. But the only time, so when I think I turned 17, my dad let me drive. He had a car at the time that was it was a Pontiac drag car that was like a purpose-built drag car. It was a tube frame chassis with, I think it was, it was made by a company down in Florida called Chassis Engineering, I believe. It was a tube frame car with a fiberglass body on it, and it had a big block Chevy in it. And so for my 17th birthday, we went out to the track out at Vegas for the weekend, and I got my NHRA license in it.
Cool.
And at the time, like, I mean, the car, I think it would run like mid-8s or something like that. At the time, like, that was crazy fast. This is, it's insane to think these days where it's like
still crazy fast though.
Well, I know,
sure,
but I mean,
it is.
back then you didn't have these like Teslas that these 7-seater cars that were running high 8s. But,
that's true.
I don't know. I don't think I ran in the 8s. I would probably ran in the low 9s. I just had to run a couple licensing passes, and they kind of send you through a progression. But everything was, I mean, everything was so cool about that. And I love the sound of, a big block Chevy. And there's something about it. You at the, I don't know. Have you been to the drag strip at Las Vegas?
I haven't.
It's like very, just like, it's kind of epic. Like there's this big arch behind the staging lines, and so you roll up, and there's a burnout box, so you roll up, and the purpose-built drag cars, they have like a line lock, so you press the brakes and you hold this button on the steering wheel. It's called a line lock, and then you let off the brake, and it I hope I don't mess this up. It's been 15-20 years since I've driven this car, but so the hardcore drag racers out there can make fun of me. But so you
hold on, I'm sure.
So it holds on the front brakes, but you let off the brake and it releases the rear brakes when you roll through the burnout box, and you get the rear wheels a little bit soaked in whatever, I think it's water and maybe a little bit something else in the burnout box. And that car was just crazy. It's got big old drag race tires on the back, and when you give it throttle and light up the rear tires, like the whole thing, you could just feel the power, just the whole car shaking, kind of moving back and forth. I think that was probably my second favorite part of each run, and then at the starting line, it was really fun too, because you come up on they have like a transmission brake on it, like you hold on this button and you give it throttle and bring it up to a certain RPM.
Yeah.
And then the lights come down and you let go, and it takes off, and the wheels came, it would do a wheelie right off the starting line. So that was a blast.
Dang.
So yeah, and it's just loud, and you hear the rumble.
That sounds like a awesome experience for sure.
Yeah, so that was about it. For a while after I was in college, my dad and my brother got into, they called it dwarf car racing. Have you ever seen it?
It's like motorcycle engines in these little like compact chassis, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect summary. But so I think I jumped in one of those for a qualifying lap once or twice. But really, just that one time when I went out to get my NHRA license was the only time I got to jump in like what I consider a real race car. And we spent, actually, when I was in my early 20s, we also did a lot of, we helped a lot with an off-road racing team, like a Baja 1000 race team.
Oh, cool.
We were on a really cool team. It was run, so this German, pretty famous German rally car driver named Armin Schwartz would fly in from Germany and drive for the team. And the team was ran by a really good friend of my dad's. So they were based out of Escondido as well. So we spent a lot of time helping out with the team, and they were running a trophy truck for a while and a class 1 buggy down in Baja. And have you ever had a chance to kind of watch some of the Baja stuff?
I haven't. No, it came on my radar last year when I was at State of Charge. Are you familiar with that conference?
I've seen it. I've seen some of the content that came out of there. I'd love to try to get to that this year.
I
but I
think you
haven't been.
should if you can. It's a lot of fun, and it's a Terry with Ohm on the Range puts it on, and it's basically all of the guys, the cars that you see, a bunch of people from SEMA that were all there go to this conference. It's kind of it's my favorite one. Anyway, there was there were some students there who were presenting on their EV trophy truck that they were trying to build, and they won a race ultimately in the Baja 1000. And what a feat! And I'm like, I mean, I'm just learning as I go, right? And I'm like, Baja 1000, that sounds familiar. And I started looking at it, and it's just like, what a feat of engineering! Really, really cool. I'd love to go and check it out someday.
If you ever get the chance, there's a couple movies. Sometimes they're on Netflix. I don't know if they're out right now, but for free anyways. It's called Dust to Glory.
Okay.
And it was these, I think they're famous for making some surfing documentaries. It's a really well put together documentary about the Baja 1000. And that it's just an epic race. Like you go down there and it's like, it almost feels like being in the middle of a war. Like you'll be out in the middle of nowhere and like outside, down this dirt road an hour from the closest paved road. And then all of a sudden you'll see this helicopter like coming over the ridge, and you'll just hear this like NASCAR engine coming over the other side of this hill. And then all of a sudden you see this ginormous, 7,000-pound trophy truck come flying over the hill. It's just incredible. And the support teams and what it takes to get one of those trucks 1,000 miles across Baja is, it would be pretty epic if someone, I was thinking about the other day, like, what it's going to take to get an EV to finish, especially finish competitively in the Baja 1000. And I will be very, very impressive if it happens anytime soon. It's probably possible. I guess anything's possible, but it's quite a feat to get a gas powered car across that. So
maybe I ought to get them on the podcast and check in, see how it's going.
Oh, that would be awesome. I mean, anything related to Baja, I find absolutely fascinating.
And the truck that they were building for it is an EV Jeep. Yeah, I think it was a 2006 Jeep is the like donor chassis.
And so, do you know if were they going to try to swap the battery pack on it?
That's what Evolve Racing is doing, and they're actually probably at Hammers. They're probably getting ready to go to Hammers right now. But I did a podcast with Keith and Melissa before. They have a really cool battery swapping idea. I don't know. I mean, they kind of have to, right? I don't know what this team, the Electric Baja Racer, is going to be doing, but I would imagine they have to have some sort of battery swapping.
It's a ton of energy. I think the trophy truck, at least the way it's traditionally done, and I think that's another thing that's fascinating with EVs is I think it forces us to rethink the way that we address kind of vehicles, the way that we address how we build cars and stuff like that. All of a sudden, for the first time, I think that we're worried about efficiency, and we do things where the cars are way more efficient. But I mean, just as a point of reference, I think the trophy truck that we ran or we helped out with had, I think it was a 100-gallon fuel tank or something like that.
Wow.
And I think it was averaging like maybe 2 miles to the gallon or something like that. Like, it's just an enormous amount of energy to get those things across the, well, hopefully theirs is a lot more efficient, but yeah, that's one thing too, that was different to me. Cause when my dad and I, my dad and I had previously done a hot rod project where we did a 68 Mustang. When I was in high school, we built a 68 Mustang. And one thing that was different about this project compared to that project was, that's one thing you got to keep in mind is how efficient all the kind of the support systems are. Like on the EV Jeep that I just finished, we chose not to use power steering. It didn't have power steering factory, back in the 50s. And depending on how you do it, there's people doing it in different ways. But if you ran like a hydraulic pump, because because you don't have, you can't run a belt off the front of the motor to power a hydraulic power steering pump. And if you just look at how much power just a kind of a hydraulic pump, like an electric motor driven hydraulic pump would take, like it's a significant amount, especially when you only have an 18 kWh battery. Like you would use a significant amount of battery just driving around, and that's one thing you got to consider too during vehicle design is especially if you're driving through the desert and you want this thing to be really good at slow speed trips with your friends. There are some components of the vehicle that are going to be time dependent, like for example, if you put power steering on it. There's other ways to do it too. Some guys are using like Prius, like I think it's Prius. Maybe it's out of some kind of, I think there's a Saturn kind of a electromechanical steering booster that some people are using that doesn't use hydraulic. But yeah, things like steering and the brake booster, things like that. Really tried to choose systems that were very efficient.
So that, I guess, brings us back to the Jeep and the components that you chose. So can you walk us through, like, from the Tesla motor back, and what did you choose for this build?
Yeah, so originally I was gonna. We talked about this a little bit when we talked at SEMA. Originally I was gonna put a small block Chevy in it. So I had done a little. So we took this off the shelf in like I don't know, 2021, and so by that point, it'd been sitting on the shelf for several years. But before it went on the shelf, I had done a little bit of work, and I was going to put Dana 44s out of Wagoneer, and I was going to pair that with a typical transfer case and things like that. So it came off the shelf, and eventually the decision was made to make it electric, and I started looking at different motors. And at the time, this is still pandemic era, or at least supply chain pandemic era.
Right.
So kind of based on kind of availability and kind of budget and, to have enough power that was going to be fun at 400 volts, I kind of ended up, leaning towards a Tesla motor. And so at that point, it became a question of what Tesla motor. I was going to use the large drive unit, which is like the 2010s era Tesla Model S rear motor, which is so common with so many. I feel like it's kind of like the I don't know, small block Chevy or big block Chevy of the EV world.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's where a lot of the Tesla conversions started with. I think it's because they're easier to crack into as far as controlling it, if I recall. Is that right?
I know there's a lot of people there's a lot of people that use it, so I think there's definitely people that know how to do all kinds of different things with that thing. I think also in some ways it's easier to adapt to mechanically too. I had some challenges adapting mechanically to the Model 3 motor, because ultimately I ended up going with the Model 3 motor because I was on the phone with Michael Breen and from EV West. He was very generous with his time to give me a little bit of advice, and he so basically, like, just like in the not old school, but in the gas world, you have a motor going to a transmission to a transfer case. Different cars will have even either a passenger side diff drop or a driver side diff drop. Basically what side of the car the forward drive shaft comes off of. And kind of similarly, in a weird way, I think that motors like Tesla drive units, when you put them sideways and kind of almost replace the transfer case with them, they're going to have a side that when they're rotating correctly, the output shafts are going to want to sit on. in between the frame rails. So if you put a Model S in a car, like a 4-wheel drive car, and try to put it like where the transfer case would be, it's going to spin the right way if the drop is on the driver's side, which was the opposite of how my axles were set up at the time.
Oh, okay.
I kind of had to, modify my axles and move the pumpkins around anyway. So in retrospect, I guess I could have just moved the pumpkins over to the other side. But I didn't do that. And I ended up using the Model 3 motor, which I think is a great motor. It's a little bit newer. It's permanent magnet motor. It's got ATF running through and cooling the motor, and it's a really smooth motor. It doesn't have those like flashy numbers that the LDU has. I think it's, I don't know, maybe 300 horsepower or something like that. Whereas I think you see people getting like 600 horsepower, something like that, out of the LDU. But
Yeah.
honestly, 300 horsepower in a 2,600 pound Jeep is pretty scary. The 56, it's a 1956 Jeep, and there's still a couple parts on it that are 70 years old. So, so it's still plenty of power for that thing.
Yeah.
And there's other, yeah. So I'm super happy with that motor. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter weight, packages really nicely. It's a little bit more efficient, and so I ended up going with that motor. Had quite a bit of challenge adapting that to the drive shafts. At the time, at least as far as I saw online, there was no one else like putting the Model 3 motor in that, using it in that sort of application, and there weren't any solutions at that time available. So I had to come up with my own kind of solution, and it kind of required quite a bit of custom machining and kind of design, which fortunately it's kind of fun for me because it's not my making electric cars isn't my day job. But I still, luckily for me, I'm able to draw on the resources of my family's business, of Meziere Enterprises, who has a lot of experience, doing things like cutting gears and making pretty complex assemblies and stuff like that. So we made these pretty special drive shafts that we were able to connect like a standard Dana 44 right to the output of the Model 3. And then we needed a battery pack, so we used the Chevy Volt battery pack. To be honest, at the time, like this is 2021-ish, kind of, and I know there was a lot of people using the Chevy Volt batteries and pairing them with all kinds of Tesla motors. So I knew that people had successfully used it. I knew that it had the right enough power density. It could support enough amperage draw to provide pretty good power to the Tesla motors. It's a 400 volt or 360 volt nominal pack, so that pairs nicely with the Tesla motors.
Yeah, that's what they're looking for. The Teslas run on 400 volts, so that's lucky.
Yeah, I think most of the common builds. That's another question I think that maybe in future podcasts I think would be fascinating. I don't know if it's come up on your podcast yet, or what the voltage is going to be that emerges as the standard in the kind of aftermarket EV performance or resto mod world. I think if I remember correctly, I think from your interview with was it the gentleman that had his car at SEMA, you said the GR86 car?
Yeah, Scalar Performance.
Scalar. If I recall correctly, were they running 800 volts?
Yeah, they're running 8, and then Teslas are all 400.
Is the Cybertruck 800 or 400?
That's a good question. I think it is 800. I
But
think it's 800.
I think, I mean, that's what's fascinating. I think that's one thing that's fascinating about the EV world. I know that, yeah, like some of the Cascadia builds are 800 volts. Obviously, all the Teslas, or at least the old school Tesla stuff, is 400 volts. So I think it'll be fascinating to see. Even the standards, I think, in the EV world aren't established yet. So I think it'll be fascinating to see where it goes.
Yeah. I just did a quick look, and I don't know, maybe someone listening, if you know, in the comments. I just did a quick Google, and it's inconclusive on if the Cybertruck actually launched with 800 or not.
Okay, sorry. I could be mistaken about
it was
that.
gonna be. I remember that, but I'm just kind of like looking here, and I think that maybe it does work with 800, but it isn't there yet, or like maybe they're just gonna open it up in the software to 8. I don't know. That'll be something to look up, or if someone knows, drop in the comments. But the pattern I've seen is that for the most part, all of the OEMs, like 400 seems to be somewhat of a sweet spot, like Tesla and Ford, Hyundai, the new Leafs. But 800, I guess, has some benefits that I wouldn't be the best to articulate because I'm still working on those engineering skills. But I think there's some benefits from efficiency, and like people are thinking the next generation of EVs are going to be that 800 volt. But a lot of the builds that are like using like Hyper 9s, the net gain motors, those are all low voltage builds. They're like, I want to say like 133 or 200 volt net, because they don't need that much for the Hyper 9s. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's so cool, like how much is in the air. I don't know, I guess that's something that just fascinates me about the EV world right now, is like, it's pretty established, like when you build a car, like you use pretty, for the most part, I guess you can run it on like race fuel or like higher octane stuff, but for the most part, it's a gas motor, and a lot of the standards, I think, in the gas world are fairly established. But
Yeah.
even there's so much stuff on the EV aftermarket world, I think, is just all over the place. So it's pretty cool because people are still allowed to be creative and figure out what they want on their car.
Yeah, it is a whole new ball game in how we go about things and what the trade-offs are. The formulas or recipes, as it were, are not developed for EVs, and there's some really cool tuning going on.
Yeah, I think, and it's at so many levels, and I think it's kind of exciting too, because like we were talking about the Baja 1000, which like even if you could just make the Baja 1000, I forget about winning any sort of competition with anyone. Like it would be super cool, and King of the Hammers and all, the land speed car. The team at Revolt has been doing some really cool stuff there.
Yeah.
I think there's just so many cool opportunities for cool stuff to happen. I think that's one cool thing that's I think exists in the EV world, and maybe it's a plus, maybe it's a minus, but I think almost it's pretty easy to do something that's pretty unique still. Like,
Yeah.
there's at least certain land speed records. I think there's like lighter weight classes and stuff. I think there's like E1, E2, E3 or something like that. And some of the lighter weight classes, or maybe the electric motorcycle class or something like that, is still maybe attainable, an attainable record, especially with the pace of technology change. I think Pikes Peak might be beyond most people's reach. I think Volkswagen set a pretty unstoppable record there. But even like drag racing, like I think there's so many cool frontiers to be explored with EV.
Yes, I agree. So what's next for you? after, I mean, this Jeep is done, right? There's no more improvements, or do you have other things, or a project car is never done?
Yeah, I mean, you've had projects before. I'm sure you know that. I could spend the rest of my life and probably the rest of my money kind of improving this and that. But I'd kind of like to do another off-road build. I really believe strongly that I think that EV cars, especially in the aftermarket world, I think that they're much more use case specific than gas cars. I think,
Hmm.
so, like I think like you buy a new diesel F-250 and you can go get groceries with it. You can haul a trailer across the country with it. You can take it off roading, but maybe it's not the best on efficiency. In different under different cases and stuff like that. Whereas maybe a new Rivian would work really nice for driving to work and save you a bunch of money and be very efficient. But maybe not the best tool to drive a trailer across the country with or something like that. But anyways, I guess what I'm saying is I think that off-road, especially like kind of fun, like weekend off-road trips where you're doing maybe 20-30 mile trail runs, a little overland trip with your friends, I think is a really, really good use case. And I think is something that I would love to focus on more. I'd like to do another off-road focused build, maybe like a overland build. Kind of been daydreaming a little bit about kind of a ground up build, like just just starting with tubing and stuff. Gotta
Cool.
understand a little bit about. I need to do a little research about what it would take to get a license plate on that. But
That sounds pretty sweet, though.
I think I mean, there's so much potential out there, and I think there's so many exciting projects out there. I think you got to kind of. My brother sends me OfferUp links. I think my wife is going to block OfferUp on my phone pretty soon. He's like always sending me, because the other thing that's cool too is like there's so many cars out there that you can get for really cheap. For like $1,000. That like before EV conversions would be like an absolute like what would you do with this? Like I saw a Ferrari or something like that. It was some kind of, I don't know, Maserati or something like that with a blown motor for like, it's not, that one wasn't as cheap, but you can get that for like 20 grand or something like that. But it's like, what are you going to do? Spend 50 grand to rebuild the motor or something like that?
Right.
Whereas these days you're thinking like, oh, maybe I can put a Tesla motor that
I love
but
those. There's a couple examples of some exotics that have gotten swapped, a couple Ferraris, and it's pretty cool. And they're putting down better numbers than when they were brand new, especially the classic ones. It's like, oh man, no maintenance. It's faster than brand new. It's tough to turn down.
yeah, I think with old cars, like honestly, like, so I mean, the Jeep is very much still I would say it's still sort of in a project phase in some sense, where I think if a complete stranger jumped in it, it might be not quite refined enough to where they would be super happy with driving around. Like, but when you build a car, you kind of know like, oh, I just need to like pull this fuse out when I charge it, or I
Yes.
need to press this button or something like that.
Yes,
Um,
I do know.
you got something like that going on some of your projects?
I used to, yeah. The Tesla
uh,
runs just fine. It's turnkey, as it were. But my last project car was a Mitsubishi Eclipse, and that had the hardwired fan to keep it cool. Had to switch that on. Had to, I had it. It was an auto, but it had the ability to like swap that into like push button shifting for if you wanted to like go really fast, then you could bypass the auto shift solenoid and manually shift the auto. And so all of these buttons and switches and things to watch. So I get it.
but I mean, but that being said, like all things considered, like even the Jeep has been shockingly, I think, reliable for me. I mean, we had this thing. I got it back. I got all the pieces back from paint like 8 days before we had to leave for Moab, and we just slammed the thing together in like 8 days. You know, I'm talking like from like just pieces in a box truck, you know, pieces of the frame and body and stuff, and we put it together. And so very little time, like making sure this thing was going to be reliable. And we took it to Moab, and one day we drove like about 20 miles round trip into town, and then we took it off-roading on the trail a few miles. And I've had it, you know, around town in Orange County, and then we took it to, did 27 miles through the desert in Anza-Borrego last week. And it's never, one time actually the low voltage battery surprisingly died, and I had to replace the low voltage battery on the side of the road. But that was more of something I goofed up when I put it together. But I think it's going to be a really reliable car, especially because I think, I don't know this, but I think that it's going to be a nice car to where if it's a fun car that you want to drive every few months or something like that, I think it's going to store pretty nicely.
Yeah.
Don't have to worry about the gas kind of going bad or anything like that.
So having your first build under your belt, do you have any lessons learned or advice for folks who are interested in this, are brand new to it, are looking to embark, or just curious?
Okay, so one thing, and I say this to everyone, and I promise I don't get paid by this forum or anything. It's I think it's a free forum, but there's this website. I don't know if have you seen DIY Electric Car Forum?
Oh yeah, they've been around for a good long time.
Oh, I mean that was really like I think a good part of how I kind of got convinced to do the project. And also like it was just so invaluable to have that forum. And you know, you can just go through there and see what everyone else has done, you know, what batteries are pairing with what motors. And especially for a first build, if you're you know, for a first build, I think I probably took a little bit more challenging route than would be advisable, but I was also had the fortune to have some really, really good resources behind me. But you can see, like, you know, you just look at what other people have done, and if 10 people on there have done, you know, paired this motor with this battery and made it work really easily, it's pretty safe bet that, you know, at least someone can help you figure it out if things go sideways. But
Yeah,
I love that forum. I have that forum opened up on like probably 3 or 4 tabs on my phone at a given time, you know.
nice. Come back to that one. All right. So DIY electric car. Any other advice for people?
Yeah, maybe just, you know, whether it's on that site or other places, just kind of look at what other people are doing. I think one thing I will say, I don't think this is controversial with anyone that's actually building cars, but maybe to someone just learning about this sort of thing. I don't think it's something at this point that's like, if you're looking for an economic way to like get to work, I don't think it's quite there yet. I mean, there's probably like really smart people that have been very clever and probably figured out how to do things, but I don't think that's what most people are doing. I think most people are building a fun car that they want, not because they think they can end up finishing a reliable daily driver cheaper than a I don't know, old Nissan Leaf or something that you could pick up that would just work.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Where if you're looking to do a conversion, it's because you love the car, or you want to play with that car and turn it into something special. It's not the value proposition of like, I'm gonna spend, you know, a lot of money to convert a commuter. At that point, you'd better be off just buy the OEM electric car and stick with it.
I think it would have been cheaper. I think my wife even jokes that next time it'd be cheaper if I just buy a new Model 3 and, you know, after a couple of years take what I want from the Model 3. But I think
Right.
all said and done, I think, and I don't know this, I'd have to go back and count the receipts, but I was given the Jeep, but I mean, honestly, an old Jeep you can pick up for cheap, so it's probably the least of the spend. But I would say it was somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000, maybe. I mean, call it 40, maybe. But I mean, I also, 2 years of my life,
Yeah.
um, a lot of resources that I was able to, a lot of people that helped me out and stuff like that, that really helped bring that price down to it. And some of it was stuff that wasn't necessary. Like there was some things that I put in that weren't necessary, and also some of the money was spent just learning lessons. Like, I bought a hydraulic power steering pump that I ended up not using because I realized it's better not to use hydraulic power steering. I probably bought 3 brake boosters before I figured out the right one. Some of it, if I did it again, I could save money, but I think that $20,000 to $30,000 on a build like this wouldn't, if you're doing the work yourself, I think wouldn't be out of the ballpark.
Yeah. I'm hoping that components are going to get cheaper in the long run. I think that they will, in not next year and not the year after, but in 10 years, as more OEMs, like the Nissan Leaf example, you can get a wrecked Leaf relatively economical, and then now you have a whole drivetrain that for the right application can be swapped in. So I imagine that in a decade, when we have even more OEMs putting out lots of different types of cars, each with their battery packs and their motors and what they're good at and what their weaknesses are, means that there's going to be more of a buffet of options to choose from, and the prices might go down accordingly too. It's still going to be a lot of work no matter what, but we got to get more Lego pieces, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree 100% with the proposition of getting more options. I think that one thing I've heard from the community repeatedly is especially especially like you go into the gas world, and you can go online, whether it's on Ford Performance or Chevy Performance, or just from Summit or whatever, and you can get a crate motor, even straight from the factory. They'll ship you a crate motor. You can get a brand new OEM transmission and all those parts you can buy. I think I would love to see, and I think the community would love to see, the opportunity coming from some of the OEMs for more of that. I know there's been a lot of talk from time to time, but it seems like it always kind of gets, haven't seen a lot of it on the market, actually.
Yeah, what happened to that? I remember a couple of years ago, GM was like, crate motor based on the Bolt. We got you. Never saw it.
Yeah, and I think I don't. So there was talk when Dodge brought the Jeep. They brought some really cool Jeeps to SEMA in 2022, and in some of the articles, and you never know, like, if maybe the author just got it wrong or something like that. But in some of the articles, and I think I could be wrong, but I think maybe even talking to some of the representatives at the booth, like it almost sounded like Dodge was considering doing something similar to like what you just mentioned. And I think you would have a lot of fans, because to get a new battery, I mean, to buy a new battery, I mean, most people are using Tesla batteries, so there's not even really a new battery that's commonly used, I don't think. So if you could buy, like, I don't know if Tesla would ever do it, but if you could buy a new Tesla battery, like, I mean, at least for a while, the Model S batteries were going for close to 20 grand for a 2015 Model S battery. And when EVs when you can buy a whole Model 3 for 30 or 40 grand, it seems to me like it could be good for everyone if the OEMs would sell you a brand new battery pack. But I haven't seen any of that.
Not yet. I think that will come, but right now they're just trying to build cars. I think is the deal. They say there's no demand, or at least sometimes they say that, but I think it's not as simple as that, because there's a lot of people that want these cars, and there's waiting lists, right, for different ones. It's gotten a little bit better, but I would venture a guess. This is a wild guess, but like, say for GM with the Bolt and their crate motor, I bet that they wanted to all the drivetrains, instead of packing them up and selling them as a crate motor, they just wanted to put them in bolts, sell the cars. So I think that that's probably why it's hard to buy OEM packs, is because they're all earmarked for cars at this point, that they want to sell. But that's maybe not forever. And as they continue to build more cars and scale up capacity, then there will be some additional battery packs and additional motors and things that could be just bought from the catalog. Fingers crossed.
I think it would be great for everyone. And you know, being around motorsports my whole life, you know, there's always been, especially with Dodge and Ford and Chevy, there's always been a very, very good relationship between the racing aftermarket community and the OEMs. I know a lot of times, like, you know, through the SEMA organization, they'll even like help you get like measurements and stuff of the cars, because they want you to make aftermarket parts for like the gas cars, and they want you to be able to have these motors for your specialty builds or race cars or whatever. So I think it would be really good for everyone if we could get to that point for the EV stuff.
That sounds like a plan. Let's do it.
Start a lobbying group or something like that.
Well, seeing the cool builds like what you put together, I think is lobby enough for me. I want to see more of these conversions. I want to see more people tracking them and doing cool things, because it gets me excited and lights that passion. At the end of the day, we're all car people who enjoy this stuff. So thank you, Kyle, for sitting down with me and talking with me about all of this stuff and nerding out. And I'm really looking forward to meeting up in SoCal in the next few months and taking that Jeep off-roading.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm stoked. I really think it would be a blast to take that thing out to Anza-Borrego. I think I'd love to have you drive it, because I think it's hard to articulate what it is until you just drive it, you know?
Done. We'll schedule it. So everyone, sometime this year, it's going to happen, and stay tuned for that video.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Kyle. Have a good one.